A house begins to crack in the middle of the night. At first, the owner blames the weather. Then, the walls split. The floor tilts. The ceiling opens and dust falls over everything he spent years arranging. He runs from room to room, trying to save furniture from a foundation that can no longer hold it. By sunrise, the structure is gone. He falls to his knees in the ruins and calls it disaster. But beneath the broken floor, hidden from view for decades, was rot so deep the house could never have become what he prayed for. Sometimes life falls apart because reality refuses to let you renovate a structure that was built on a lie. There is a belief buried so deeply inside of you that you may never have spoken it aloud. It says this: when things fall apart, something has gone wrong. It says you were abandoned. It says you failed. It says the universe has turned against you, or that you are being punished for something you cannot name and cannot undo. This belief is the first structure that must be examined, because it is not the truth. It is an inheritance, and like all inherited structures, it was built long before you were old enough to question the material. The human mind has been conditioned across generations to interpret collapse as consequence. We were taught in various forms and through various languages that stability is virtue and disruption is judgment. The child who grows up in a home where everything must appear orderly learns that disorder means danger. The adult shaped by institutions learns that failure is evidence of inadequacy. The spiritual seeker who was never given a more complete map learns that suffering is either punishment from above or proof that their faith was insufficient. None of these interpretations are neutral. All of them are architectures, and all of them were built by someone else long before you arrived. Here is what this belief costs you when your life begins to fall apart. It costs you the capacity to read what is actually happening. The moment you decide that collapse equals failure, you stop being a student of the event and become a defendant in a trial you invented. You move from discernment into self-prosecution. You stop asking, "What is this removing?" and begin demanding to know what you did wrong. And in that courtroom of your own construction, you will always find evidence, because the mind that is searching for guilt will always find enough fragments to build a verdict. But consider something that the punishment interpretation cannot account for. Consider that some of the most significant moments of renewal in your own life came directly after a loss so painful you were certain you would not survive it. Consider that some of the most aligned seasons of your life began in ruins you did not choose. Consider that the version of you who now reads clearly, loves more honestly, and moves with more discernment than before was not shaped by the comfortable rooms of your life. That version was shaped in the aftermath of a structure that had to go. Collapse is not punishment. Collapse is removal. These are not the same thing. Punishment is retributive. It looks backward. It is designed to correct or avenge, but removal is functional. It looks forward. It is designed to make space for something that cannot coexist with what was already there. When a tree loses its dead branches in a storm, the storm is not punishing the tree. The storm is simply doing what the tree's own biology could not do fast enough. The false branches could not be allowed to remain without starving the living ones. Most people do not dispute this when the metaphor is a tree. They dispute it when the structure is their marriage, their career, their financial identity, or their sense of self. Because those structures feel like self. They do not feel like branches. They feel like the trunk itself. And this is precisely where the misreading begins. When you cannot distinguish between who you are and what you have built around yourself, then the removal of the structure feels like the removal of your identity. It feels like dying. And a mind that believes it is dying will do almost anything to stop the process, even if the process is the only thing that can save it. This codex is not interested in making collapse comfortable. Comfort is not the goal here. The goal is literacy. The ability to read what is happening around you with enough clarity that you stop fighting the signal and begin working with it. Because there is a difference between a life that is falling apart and a life that is being reorganized from beneath. There is a difference between abandonment and renovation. And that difference, once you understand it, changes everything about how you navigate the void. The false belief also carries a second layer that is rarely examined. Not only does it say that collapse is punishment, it also says that the structure that collapsed was good, that it was worth keeping, that if only you had worked harder, held tighter, prayed louder, it would have survived. But this assumption deserves a direct question. What if the structure that fell was never capable of holding what you were becoming? What if the collapse was not evidence of your failure to preserve it, but evidence of its fundamental inability to contain your next chapter? There are structures in your life that were built from fear. You built them because you needed safety, and fear knows how to construct convincing architecture. There are structures that were built from other people's definitions of success. You built them because you were handed a blueprint and told it was the only one that existed. There are structures built from scarcity, from performance, from the need for approval, from the belief that you had to earn your own peace. All of these structures can stand for years, some of them stand for decades, but they are always holding something in that they should be releasing. And they are always blocking something out that belongs inside. The deeper truth that this archive holds is this: reality does not punish the structures it removes. Reality simply cannot sustain a contradiction. When who you are becoming is fundamentally incompatible with the framework you have been living inside, one of them will yield, and it will not always yield quietly. Sometimes it yields with tremendous force. Sometimes it yields all at once in a single season, and everything you thought was permanent is suddenly behind you. This is not catastrophe. This is the law of structural removal in motion. And the law is not cruel. It is precise. What you are being asked to release through this collapse is not your future. It is the version of the future that could only be accessed by remaining someone you no longer are. This is a distinction worth sitting with. The life that fell apart was not your destiny. It was your scaffolding. Scaffolding is necessary during construction, but scaffolding is never the building. And no architect leaves the scaffolding standing once the real structure begins to rise. The false belief ends here. Collapse is not proof that you were wrong to hope. Collapse is not evidence that the universe has turned its back. Collapse is not punishment dressed in the language of loss. Collapse is the mechanism through which reality removes what cannot hold your next form. And once you understand this, once you genuinely internalize it at the level where beliefs are actually stored, the ruins beneath your feet stop being evidence of destruction. They become the cleared ground on which something real can finally be built. This codex is called the Ruin Code, and it was written for the moment you are in right now, not the moment before collapse and not the distant moment of full reconstruction. This codex was written for the specific and disorienting territory between what fell and what has not yet arrived. That space is not empty, though it feels that way. That space is an archive, And inside it, if you know how to read the language, there is a map. Here is what this codex will decode for you. First, you will learn to recognize what wrong structure looks like from the inside before it collapses as it is collapsing, and in its aftermath. You will learn to see the signs that a structure was built on misaligned foundations, not because you were foolish, but because you were operating from the beliefs and blueprints available to you at the time. Recognition is not blame. Recognition is the beginning of literacy. Second, you will understand the mechanism, the hidden law that governs structural removal. Why reality cannot sustain contradiction indefinitely. Why growth that is genuine will eventually outpace containers that were built for a smaller version of you. Why the universe does not deliver what you are praying for into a structure that was built to prevent exactly that. This mechanism has a name inside this library. It is called the law of structural removal. And once you understand it, you will never be able to see collapse the same way again. Third, you will learn to grieve. This is not a step that can be skipped or spiritually bypassed. Grief is not weakness. Grief is not a sign that you have misread the collapse. Grief is the honest acknowledgement that something real was there, even if it was wrong for you. The person in the wrong relationship still loved. The person in the wrong career still invested years of their identity. The person who lost their financial structure still built something with their hands. Grief honors what was without lying about what it could not hold. It is a sacred and necessary part of the protocol. Fourth, you will learn what must not be done in the immediate aftermath of collapse. This section of the codex may be the most practically important, because the instinct that arrives after a structure falls is almost always to rebuild immediately, and to rebuild using the exact same materials that were already proven insufficient. The panic of the void is real, and it will deceive you into mistaking replacement for resolution. The Ruin Code holds a specific warning for this moment, and it holds a method for surviving the void without filling it prematurely. Fifth, you will learn to identify the first signs of the new blueprint. This is not about forcing optimism. It is about developing the perceptual skill to recognize genuine alignment when it begins to emerge from the cleared ground. There is a frequency to authentic new beginnings. It feels different from the compensatory structures that fear builds in the aftermath of loss. You will learn to feel the difference, and you will learn to wait for it without that waiting becoming paralysis. Sixth, and finally, you will learn how to rebuild from alignment rather than from emergency. There is a kind of building that comes from clarity, from a genuine and settled knowing of what belongs in this next chapter. And there is a kind of building that comes from the desperate need to not be in the ruins anymore. These two kinds of building produce radically different results. One produces a home, the other produces a replica of the structure that already fell. This codex will teach you how to tell the difference between them before the first stone is laid. The map is now before you. The sections of this archive move in the order that the experience itself demands. You will not be rushed forward. You will not be given false comfort. You will be walked through the mechanism, the mirror, the protocol, and the return. And by the time you reach the final pages of this codex, you will not be the same person who was kneeling in the ruins at the beginning. You will be the person who understands what the ruins were trying to tell them. This is a long-form archive. It is designed to be listened to when you are sitting in the debris of something that mattered to you. It is designed to be returned to when the confusion returns, when the grief resurges, when the void feels larger than you can bear. Do not rush through it. Let it move through you at the pace that the truth requires. If the language of this library feels like a language you have always known but were never given permission to speak, keep this channel close. The third library exists for exactly this kind of listener. There are more codices here, more mechanisms to be decoded, more forgotten protocols waiting to be opened. Subscribe and let the archive continue to find you. Before anything can be rebuilt, the law beneath the collapse must be named, not described loosely, not approached poetically without grounding, named with precision. Because this law operates whether you understand it or not. And the difference between those who are destroyed by collapse and those who are transformed by it is almost entirely a difference in their understanding of this law. The law is this: reality cannot sustain a permanent contradiction between who you are becoming and the structure you are currently living inside. When the distance between your actual trajectory and your current container becomes too great, the container yields. This is not metaphor. This is a structural principle. It operates in architecture, in biology, in relationship systems, in organizations, and in the invisible architecture of a human life. Pressure that cannot be metabolized will eventually find release. The only variable is the form that release takes. Think of a vessel designed to hold a certain volume. When the contents exceed that volume, the vessel does not morally evaluate the situation. It does not assess guilt or distribute blame. It simply cannot maintain its integrity under conditions it was never built for. The crack is not punishment. The crack is physics. And what you call the collapse of your life is, at its deepest structural level, the same kind of physics applied to the architecture of human experience. Now, why does this law matter for how you read what is happening to you? Because if collapse is physics rather than punishment, then the question changes entirely. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and begin asking, "What was this structure unable to hold?" You stop looking for the sin that caused the storm and begin examining the foundation that could not survive it. This is not a small shift. This shift is the entire difference between someone who repeats the pattern and someone who decodes it. The law of structural removal operates in layers. The first layer is physical. Your body, your finances, your home, your career, your relationship. These are the visible structures. When they collapse, you can see the damage. You can photograph the ruins. You can point to what is gone. Most people spend almost all of their energy in this layer because it is the most immediate and because the pain here is undeniable. But beneath the physical layer is a second layer, the layer of identity structure. This is the invisible architecture. It is made of beliefs, assumptions, stories, self-concepts, and emotional frameworks that you have built around yourself over the course of your life. These identity structures are the real containers. The physical structures in your life are almost always expressions of the identity structures beneath them. The relationship you were in reflected what you believed you deserved. The career you built reflected what you believed was possible. The financial reality you lived inside reflected what you believed money meant and what it required of you. When a physical structure collapses, it is often because the identity structure beneath it had already been compromised. The crack in the relationship existed in the belief long before it appeared in the behavior. The instability in the career existed in the assumption long before it appeared in the outcome. Reality does not break your external structures first. It breaks them last. The cracking began inside, in the invisible architecture, long before the walls you could see began to show the damage. This is why the law of structural removal is not random. It is not arbitrary chaos arriving without signal. By the time a structure collapses in your visible life, reality has already been communicating its insufficiency through subtler channels for some time. Through the discomfort you could not name, through the exhaustion that rest did not repair, through the recurring sense that something was wrong even when nothing appeared to be, through the quiet knowing that the life you were living could not hold the life you could feel trying to emerge. These were all transmissions. And the collapse is what happens when those transmissions go long enough without a response. Here is the deeper principle embedded in this law. Reality is not trying to harm you through collapse. Reality is trying to prevent a specific and devastating outcome. The outcome of you arriving at the end of your life, having lived entirely inside a structure that was built on misalignment. The collapse is intervention. It is the universe refusing to allow a more permanent and more devastating structural failure, which would be the failure of your entire trajectory rather than only the container that was holding you back. This is worth sitting with carefully. The structure that fell was not your life. It was a version of your life that could only continue if a deeper truth remained suppressed. And the deeper truth cannot be suppressed indefinitely. It will find pressure, it will find an exit. And when it does, the structures built on top of its suppression will crack. This is not cruelty. This is integrity. Reality maintaining its own integrity even when you could not yet afford to maintain yours. The law of structural removal also operates according to timing. The collapse does not always arrive at the moment the misalignment begins. It arrives at the moment when the gap between your current structure and your actual forward trajectory has become wide enough that the contradiction can no longer be metabolized quietly. This means that sometimes, by the time the collapse arrives, you have been living inside a wrong structure for years. The collapse can feel sudden, but the law has been working much longer than the crisis makes visible. There is another dimension of this law that is rarely discussed in spiritual or metaphysical frameworks. The law does not only remove what is wrong, it also protects what is right from being wasted inside what is wrong. Consider what would have happened if the structure had not collapsed. Consider how long you would have continued investing your energy, your attention, your best hours, your deepest devotion into something that was fundamentally incapable of delivering what you most needed. The collapse did not only end something, it also stopped the hemorrhage. What the law removes is not chosen arbitrarily. The patterns of what falls are deeply specific and deeply personal. What collapses in your life is what was most misaligned with your actual forward identity, and this means that the collapse is, in a very precise sense, a transmission about who you are becoming. Because what cannot survive the pressure of your growth is what was built for the version of you who no longer exists. Consider the concept of renovation. When a building is being renovated to serve a new and more complex purpose, certain structural elements must be removed. Walls that defined the old floor plan must come down. Pipes that served the old system must be redirected. Foundations that cannot bear the new load must be reinforced or replaced. None of this removal is punishment directed at the old building. It is all preparation for what the building is becoming. Your life operates according to this same logic. The renovation metaphor has one critical limitation, though, and this limitation must be stated honestly. In a typical renovation, the architect knows the new design in advance. They have a blueprint before the demolition begins. But in the renovation of a human life, the new blueprint does not always arrive before the old structure falls. Sometimes you are in the rubble without a design. Sometimes the next form is not yet visible. And this is the hardest part of the law to accept, because it means there is a period of genuine uncertainty that cannot be shortened by strategy alone. This period without a blueprint is the void. And the void is the most misunderstood part of the entire collapse sequence. Most people treat the void as the problem. They treat it as the part that needs to be filled as quickly as possible. But the void is not the problem. The void is the law continuing to operate. It is the cleared ground. It is reality holding open the space in which the correct new structure can emerge without contamination from the old materials that have already been identified as insufficient. The law requires the void, because if you move immediately from collapse to reconstruction without passing through genuine emptiness, you will almost certainly reconstruct using the same misaligned materials, the same fear-based blueprints, the same identity assumptions that made the original structure incompatible with your actual trajectory. The void is not comfortable. The void is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be honest, and honesty at this depth requires a kind of stillness that the panic of loss makes almost impossible to access without training. Now, there is a question that almost everyone asks when they are sitting in the void. The question is, how long? How long must I remain in this emptiness before the next structure becomes visible? This codex will not offer you a false timeline. What it will offer you is a more useful question. Instead of asking how long, begin asking what is still here. What remains after the wrong structure was removed? What survived the collapse? What feels true even now in the rubble, stripped of all the architecture that used to define you? Because what remains after genuine collapse is not nothing. What remains is signal. What remains is the irreducible truth of who you are beneath every structure you ever built around yourself. And that truth is precisely what the new blueprint will be drawn from. Not from the panic of the void, not from the fear of remaining in the rubble, but from the quiet, honest inventory of what the law of structural removal could not take from you, because it was never built on a lie. The law of structural removal is also cumulative. Each time you pass through a genuine collapse and emerge with greater literacy about what fell and why, your ability to recognize the early signals of structural misalignment improves. You develop what might be called collapse discernment, the ability to feel the first small cracks before they become catastrophic fractures. The ability to begin the honest examination of a structure before reality is forced to remove it at full force. This is one of the most valuable capacities a human being can develop, and it is only available to those who did not simply survive their collapses, but read them. The law is not your enemy. This is the central transmission of this entire codex. The law is not working against you. The law is working toward the version of you that the wrong structure was preventing from existing. The collapse is not the end of your story. It is the mechanism through which the story you were actually meant to be living becomes structurally possible for the first time. You were not destroyed. You were cleared. And clearing, though it looks exactly like destruction from the inside, is the foundational act of every genuine new beginning. The difference between destruction and clearing is not in the event. It is in what follows. And what follows is entirely dependent on how well you can read the ruins. This law has been operating in your life for as long as you have been alive. Every time something significant fell apart, this law was at work. Some of those collapses you read correctly, eventually. Others you rebuilt over immediately and then watched fall again in a different form because the underlying structure had never been replaced. The pattern of repeated collapse is the law trying to deliver the same signal through a different chapter. And the signal does not stop until it is received. The reason most people misread collapse is not that they are foolish, it is that they have been taught to identify themselves with their structures. From very early in life, the question of who are you is answered with what you have, what you do, where you belong, and who you are attached to. These answers feel like identity. They feel like self, but they are not self. They are descriptions of structure. And when the structure is removed, the person who identified with it does not experience the loss of a container. They experience the loss of themselves. This is the core misreading. Collapse feels like annihilation because we have fused our identity to our circumstances. The person who lost the relationship does not only grieve the partnership, they grieve the version of themselves that existed inside it. The person who lost the career does not only grieve the income or the title, they grieve the identity that the career provided. This is real grief. It should not be dismissed, but it must be understood correctly. Because as long as you believe the collapse took yourself, you cannot read what the collapse was actually removing. Consider the nature of identity fusion. You spent years inside a particular role. Maybe it was the role of partner or provider or professional or parent or member of a community or adherent of a particular belief system. Over time, that role stopped feeling like something you were doing and began feeling like something you were. The performance became identity. The structure became self. And when that structure was removed, the question that emerged from the rubble was not what was that structure unable to hold. The question was, who am I now that it is gone? This is an important question, but asked too early from the center of the collapse, it becomes a source of panic rather than a doorway to clarity. Because the person in full identity crisis cannot access discernment, they can only access emergency. And emergency does not read signals. Emergency fills silence. Emergency seeks the nearest available structure that resembles what was lost and attaches to it with the same devotion that caused the original misalignment. There is also the dimension of social architecture. Your structures did not exist only inside you. They existed inside a network of relationships, expectations, and social agreements. When the structure collapsed, it did not only disrupt your private world. It disrupted every social relationship that was organized around what you were before. People who were comfortable with the old version of you may not know how to relate to the version that is emerging. This creates an additional and very real pressure to reconstruct quickly, to become legible again, to rebuild something that can be recognized by the social world that knew you through your previous structure. This social pressure is one of the most significant reasons people misread collapse. They are not reading the signal from inside, they are reading the reaction from outside. And the outside world, operating from its own fear of change and its own investment in your predictability, will almost always communicate that the collapse is wrong, that you need to fix it immediately, that you need to get back to what you were as quickly as possible. The social environment around a collapsing structure is rarely capable of holding space for the void that follows it. Another major source of misreading is the belief that certainty is the same as correctness. The structures that collapsed around you felt certain. They felt real and established and defined. And certainty, especially long-term certainty, carries an enormous psychological weight. The longer something has been present, the more it feels like it should be permanent. But duration is not the same as alignment. Something can exist in your life for 10 years and still be fundamentally wrong for you. The length of a structure's presence has no bearing on whether it was built on truth. People also misread collapse because they mistake the intensity of their investment for proof of the structure's correctness. You worked so hard for that relationship. You sacrificed so much for that career. You built that financial structure through years of discipline and effort. And the collapse of something you worked that hard for feels like a betrayal of the work itself. But effort does not sanctify structure. You can pour enormous effort into a misaligned container and produce an extremely stable version of the wrong life. Investment is not discernment, and the pain of losing what you worked for, while entirely real, is not evidence that the structure deserved to remain. The misreading is also fed by what collapse looks like from a distance. Collapse is socially legible as failure. It wears the face of failure. It has the external markers of failure. Job loss looks like failure. Relationship ending looks like failure. Financial disruption looks like failure. And inside a culture that has not been given the language of structural removal, failure is the only available interpretation. So you adopt it, not because it is true, but because it is the only story that the available vocabulary can construct around what you are experiencing. There is also the question of attachment to specific outcomes. Many people carry a very detailed internal image of what their life is supposed to look like. That image contains specific relationships, specific professional identities, specific financial realities, specific timelines. And when collapse removes one of these specifics, it does not only remove the thing itself, it appears to remove the entire image. The loss of one structure can feel like the destruction of the entire vision. This is because the vision was built with those specific structures as load-bearing walls. Remove one, and the whole design appears to fall. But the vision and the specific structure are not the same thing. The vision contains a desire for connection, for meaning, for contribution, for security, for love, for creative expression. The specific structure was one attempt to fulfill that vision. And it was an attempt that was built with the beliefs, the tools, and the understanding available at the time of its construction. The collapse of the specific structure does not collapse the vision. It only collapses the first version of the architecture. And the vision, which is the actual signal beneath all the structure, remains. People misread collapse because they cannot see through the rubble to the signal beneath it. The rubble is loud. The rubble is immediate. The rubble contains pieces of everything that mattered, scattered across the floor in configurations that looked nothing like what they used to be. Reading through rubble requires a specific kind of perceptual training. It requires the ability to look at what has been destroyed and to ask, without closing your eyes to the destruction, what was this structure unable to hold? What was this structure preventing? And what is visible now that was not visible before the walls came down? There is one final dimension of misreading that must be addressed here, because it is perhaps the most spiritually disorienting. Some people have been actively praying, intending, hoping, and working toward a particular transformation. They know at some level that their current structure is not right. They can feel the misalignment. And then the collapse arrives, and instead of recognizing it as the answer to everything they were reaching toward, they interpret it as proof that their practice failed, that their prayers went unanswered, that the universe did not respond to their intention. This is one of the most painful and ironic misreadings in the entire landscape of collapse. The collapse is the answer. The disruption is the mechanism through which what was prayed for is being made possible. But because the answer arrived in the form of loss rather than addition, in the form of removal rather than gift, in the form of demolition rather than delivery, it was not recognized. And the person who prays for transformation and then fights the very collapse that transformation requires will find themselves in a very particular kind of contradiction. They are asking for a new life while protecting the structure that prevents it. The experience of job loss is one of the most common contexts in which the law of structural removal operates most visibly. Consider the person who has spent years inside a career that provided income, identity, and social belonging, but that extracted from them something they could not easily name. A quality of aliveness, a sense of genuine engagement, a feeling of moving toward something real. They stayed because the structure was stable. They stayed because leaving seemed reckless. And then the structure ended, not through their choice, but through layoff, organizational collapse, or an environment that became unbearable. In the immediate aftermath of that job loss, the dominant experience is almost always panic and shame. Panic because the financial structure is disrupted. Shame because the social identity is disrupted. What do I tell people? What am I now without this title? How do I fill the gap on the resume? These are real concerns, but they are the surface layer of the experience. The deeper layer, which is far more difficult to access in the first weeks of the disruption, is the question, what was that career preventing me from becoming? Because in almost every case of structural job loss that led eventually to genuine reinvention, there is a retrospective recognition. The person who was forced out of the wrong career, who sat in the rubble long enough to read the signal, who resisted the urge to reconstruct immediately and instead held the discomfort of the void, eventually arrived at work that was not only financially sustainable, but fundamentally aligned with who they actually were. Not because they were brave enough to choose it, but because the structure that would have prevented it had been removed. The ending of a significant relationship is another territory where this law operates with particular intensity, because the identity fusion in close relationships is among the deepest that human beings experience. You did not only love that person, you were, in some way, partially constituted by the relationship itself. The way you saw yourself, the daily rhythms of your life, the social world you inhabited, the future you were moving toward, all of these were shaped by the shared structure of that partnership. When it ended, it was not a subtraction, it was a demolition. And in the first phase of that demolition, the grief is genuine and must not be rushed. But beneath the grief, beneath the real and legitimate pain of loss, there is almost always a signal that must eventually be read. What was that relationship preventing? Not in the sense of blame toward the other person, but in the honest accounting of what the dynamic required you to suppress, compromise, silence, or sacrifice. What version of yourself could not exist inside that structure? What dreams were incompatible with the container of that particular partnership? Consider the person who lost a long-term relationship and spent the first months certain that the loss was only tragedy. And then, slowly, as the void cleared and the new reality began to reveal itself, recognized that inside the relationship, they had been slowly disappearing. Not because the other person was malicious, but because the structure of the dynamic required a smaller version of them than the one that was trying to emerge. The collapse was not the destruction of love. It was the removal of a structure that love alone could not sustain. Financial disruption is perhaps the most materially threatening form of structural collapse, and the one that most directly activates the survival nervous system. When money structures fail, whether through debt, business collapse, job loss, market disruption, or the unraveling of a financial identity that was built over years, the experience is visceral. It is not philosophical. It is urgent, and urgency is the enemy of reading. But inside even the most materially devastating financial collapses, there is almost always a structural signal that deserves honest examination. Not because the collapse was deserved, but because financial structures are often expressions of deeper identity beliefs. The person who built their entire financial reality on a single income stream, a single identity, a single strategy, was often doing so because the belief beneath the structure said that this particular path was the only one available to them. The collapse of the path forces the examination of the belief. And the examination of the belief often reveals that the belief was the real limitation, not the path itself. Consider the entrepreneur whose first business failed completely. Everything they had built, every structure they had created, collapsed in a season. The external reading of this is straightforward. The business did not work. But the internal reading, available only to those willing to sit in the rubble honestly, is far more complex. What did that business require of me that was not sustainable? What did it reveal about how I relate to risk, to control, to identity, to the meaning I was attaching to success? What does the fact that it collapsed in this specific way tell me about what I was building and why? The business failure that is read with this kind of honesty produces something that cannot be produced any other way. It produces a recalibrated understanding of what the next structure needs to be built from. Not from the same fear, not from the same need for validation, not from the same misunderstanding of what sustainability actually requires. The collapse becomes the most expensive and most important teacher that money could not have purchased on any other terms. Relocation is a form of structural collapse that is often underestimated in its psychological impact. When you are forced to leave a place, whether through financial necessity, relationship dissolution, career disruption, or circumstances beyond your control, you lose not only the physical space, you lose the social infrastructure, the familiar rhythms, the environmental cues that told you who you were. Place is a structure, and the loss of place is a kind of collapse that can leave you disoriented in ways that the external world rarely recognizes as legitimate grief. But the person who is forced to relocate, who finds themselves in a new city or a new country without the social and environmental architecture they relied on, is also in a position that is extraordinarily rare. They are stripped of the external confirmation of their old identity. They cannot be who they were in the old place because the old place no longer exists around them. And in this disorientation, something becomes possible that the comfortable old environment would never have allowed. A genuine re-examination of who they actually are beneath the location, the community, the familiar world that had been scaffolding an identity for years. Spiritual crisis is a form of structural collapse that occurs at the level of meaning itself. When the belief system that organized your understanding of reality, of yourself, of your purpose and your place in the larger order begins to crack, the collapse is not external. It is foundational. And because meaning structures are the deepest containers of all, their collapse produces a specific kind of disorientation that is unlike any other form of loss. The person going through a spiritual crisis has not simply lost a belief. They have lost the lens through which they were reading everything. Every sign, every event, every relationship, every pain, every joy, everything that happened in their life was being interpreted through a particular framework. When that framework cracks, reality itself appears to become illegible. And in that illegibility, the terror is not that things are bad, it is that things no longer mean anything. This is perhaps the most acute form of the void that the law of structural removal produces. But consider what becomes possible inside a genuine spiritual crisis. The person who has lost their previous meaning structure and who resists the urge to immediately replace it with another prepackaged framework is standing in the most fertile ground that a human consciousness can occupy. They are not defended by an inherited interpretation of reality. They are genuinely open to what reality actually is rather than what they were told it was. And from that openness, if it can be held without collapsing into nihilism, an authentic spiritual understanding can emerge, one that is built from genuine encounter rather than inherited architecture. Identity breakdown is the collapse that contains all the others. It is what happens when enough external structures have been removed that the question of who you are can no longer be answered with what you have or what you do. The person in full identity breakdown cannot locate themselves through their role, their relationship, their career, their financial status, their belief system, or their social belonging. All of the mirrors that used to reflect back a coherent self are gone, and what remains is what was always there beneath all of them, but what was never given sufficient space to be recognized. The recognition of this deeper self, the one beneath all the structures, is one of the most profound and disorienting events a human being can experience. It is profound because what is found there is often far more authentic, far more aligned, and far more alive than anything that was living inside the collapsed structures. It is disorienting because that authentic self has no immediate external architecture. It exists in the void. And the void, as this codex has already established, is not comfortable. But it is truthful. And truth is the only material that genuine new structure can be built from. Consider the person who went through all of these collapses simultaneously. Job gone, relationship ended, financial structure disrupted, location changed, belief system cracked, identity unrecognizable, and who sat in the ruins of all of it long enough to read every signal that each collapsed structure was sending, who grieved honestly, who resisted the urgency to reconstruct, who asked with genuine curiosity rather than desperation, what was each of these structures preventing me from being? And who began, slowly from the cleared ground, to build a life that was not a replica of what fell, but a first true expression of who they actually were. That person exists. That person is not rare. That person is what becomes possible when collapse is read correctly. When the law of structural removal is understood rather than resisted, when the ruins are treated not as evidence of failure, but as the most precise and honest feedback reality, was capable of delivering about the distance between the old structure and the actual forward trajectory. The collapse rarely arrives without warning. This is one of the most important recognitions in the entire field of structural literacy. Before the walls fall, reality communicates through a specific sequence of signals that escalate in volume and precision as the structural misalignment becomes more acute. The pattern of pre-collapse communication is consistent enough to be recognized, and once you learn to recognize it, you can read the language of structural stress long before the crisis becomes unavoidable. The first signal is what might be called the low hum of wrongness. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with clarity. It is the quiet, persistent sense that something is off, even when everything appears to be functioning. The job is stable and the income is present, and the relationship is cordial and the routine is intact. And yet there is this unnameable feeling beneath the surface of the ordinary day that tells you something is not right. This signal is easily ignored. It is easily attributed to mood, to tiredness, to stress, to the ordinary difficulties of a complicated life. But the low hum of wrongness is not mood. It is a structural signal. It is the first whisper from the gap between your actual forward trajectory and the container you are currently living inside. It has no specific content in the early stages. It is more like a frequency than a message. And most people spend years inside this frequency without reading it as a transmission. They manage it with distraction, with entertainment, with busyness, with substances, with the relentless occupation of every moment that might otherwise allow the hum to become audible enough to confront. The second signal is repetition. When the hum is not read, it begins to repeat itself in more specific forms. The same argument recurs in the relationship. The same frustration recurs in the career. The same financial pattern recurs in the money structure. The same emotional experience recurs in social interactions. The repetition is not coincidence. It is the feedback loop of the law of structural removal, attempting to deliver a more legible version of the original transmission. If the first signal was a frequency, the second signal is a sentence. And the sentence, translated from the language of repeated experience, is, "This is the specific point where your structure cannot hold what you need it to hold." The third signal is exhaustion of a particular quality, not the exhaustion of overwork, though it may also contain that. The specific exhaustion of performing a self that no longer fits. When you are living inside a structure that is fundamentally misaligned with who you are becoming, the maintenance of that structure requires an extraordinary ongoing expenditure of energy. You are not just doing the work of the life, you are also doing the work of being someone who fits inside it. And that second work is often invisible even to yourself, which makes the exhaustion it produces difficult to trace to its actual source. When this exhaustion is present, rest does not repair it fully. You can sleep for 9 hours and wake up tired. You can take a vacation and return depleted within days. You can manage your schedule and simplify your commitments and still feel like something is draining you that no logistical adjustment can address. This is the signal of structural incompatibility. The container is costing more energy to maintain than the contents can produce, and the system is telling you this through the experience of exhaustion that does not respond to the remedies you know how to apply. The fourth signal is the arrival of strange delays. When a structure is approaching collapse, the forward momentum that used to feel natural begins to encounter friction. Applications that should produce responses do not. Opportunities that appear to be forming dissolve before they solidify. Conversations that were moving toward a conclusion stall indefinitely. Plans that seemed certain become uncertain without clear reason. These delays are often interpreted as external obstruction, as bad luck, as the universe withholding. But they can also be read as something else entirely. The delays are sometimes the mechanism of structural removal operating in real time. They are the law preventing you from moving further into a structure that is about to be cleared. If the opportunity had materialized, it would have anchored you more deeply inside the wrong container. If the plan had moved forward, it would have extended the life of a structure that was already compromised. The delays were not withholding the future. They were protecting you from spending more energy inside a version of the future that was never going to hold your actual trajectory. The fifth signal is what might be called the arrival of emotional deadness. There is a specific kind of numbness that appears when a structure has been sustained beyond its actual viability for too long. It is not sadness exactly, though sadness is often present beneath it. It is the absence of genuine feeling in response to what used to evoke feeling. The work that once gave you a sense of purpose begins to produce nothing. The relationship that once felt alive begins to feel like a script being performed. The spiritual practice that once felt like a genuine connection begins to feel like an obligation. Emotional deadness is not depression in a clinical sense, though it can resemble it. It is the specific response of a living consciousness to a structure that has become incompatible with its actual state. When the structure and the self no longer align, the self begins to withdraw its genuine emotional investment from the performance of the structure. What remains is the motion of the life without the actual presence of the person inside it. And this withdrawal of presence, this gradual departure from genuine inhabitation of your own existence, is one of the most precise signals the law of structural removal produces. The sixth signal is the arrival of ignored truth. In every structure that is approaching collapse, there is a truth that has been known at some level for some time, but that has been strategically avoided. The truth about the relationship that cannot be spoken aloud. The truth about the career that the ambition will not allow to be acknowledged. The truth about the financial structure that the fear of loss will not permit to be examined honestly. The truth about the belief system that the investment in its continuity will not allow to be questioned. This ignored truth is often the most precise transmission available, because it contains in its very content the clearest possible description of what the structure cannot hold. The truth that is being avoided is the truth about the misalignment, and the energy required to continue avoiding it is part of what makes the structural maintenance so exhausting. Because suppression is expensive, and the cost of suppressing a truth that belongs inside your conscious awareness is borne by the entire system that is working to keep it outside of your attention. The seventh signal is the physical body speaking. Before collapse arrives, the body is often already in dialogue with the structural misalignment, not always through dramatic symptoms, sometimes through persistent low-grade signals. The jaw that is always slightly clenched, the chest that is always slightly compressed, the sleep that is never fully restorative, the appetite that is quietly shifted, the energy that responds poorly to circumstances that used to feel manageable. The body does not lie about structural incompatibility. It cannot. And while this codex makes no medical claims and encourages you to attend to your physical health through appropriate means, the body's communication must be included in any honest map of pre-collapse signals. Then, if all of these signals have been received without response, the pattern shifts. The signals intensify, the low hum becomes a loud noise, the repetitions become crises, the delays become doors that will not open regardless of effort, the exhaustion becomes incapacity, the emotional deadness becomes grief, the ignored truth becomes unavoidable, the body becomes insistent in its communication, and finally, often suddenly in its final expression, even when long in its preparation, the structure gives way. The collapse arrives, and in its arrival, everything that the previous signals were attempting to communicate becomes undeniable. The truth that was being avoided is now visible in the rubble. The structural incompatibility that the body was signaling is now manifest in external reality. The emotional deadness that was present for months or years is now explained by the fact that the structure it was responding to has proven itself to be exactly as misaligned as the feeling was trying to communicate. The pattern of collapse, when read in this sequence, is not a random event. It is the final chapter of a long communication. And the communication, if you trace it back through the signals, was always carrying the same fundamental message. This structure cannot hold what you are becoming. This structure was not built on a foundation that can bear the weight of your actual forward trajectory. Something must change, and now something has. This is the pattern. Recognize it in your past. Recognize where the hum was present before the crisis. Recognize where the repetitions were attempting to deliver a message that was not yet legible. Recognize where the delays were protection rather than obstruction. Recognize where the exhaustion was structural rather than logistical. Recognize where the deadness was signal rather than permanent condition. And then turn this recognition toward any structure in your current life that is producing these same signals before the collapse becomes the only available form of communication. If you are reading these words and recognizing this pattern in your own life right now, take a moment to sit with what you are recognizing. Do not rush past it. Do not immediately strategize a response. Simply allow the recognition to be present. Because recognition is the beginning of literacy. And literacy is the beginning of a different relationship with whatever comes next. Write the word ruin in the comments if you have ever felt reality communicating through the cracks in a structure you were not yet ready to release. This archive holds space for every form of that recognition. When your life falls apart, it reveals something that no amount of comfort or stability could have shown you. It reveals the invisible architecture of your inner world with a clarity that only the removal of the outer world can produce. Because as long as the external structure is intact, it acts as a kind of insulation between your surface identity and the beliefs, attachments, fears, and assumptions that are actually governing your life from beneath. The collapse removes the insulation, and what is underneath becomes visible. The first thing collapse reveals is the nature of your stability, specifically, whether your sense of security was real or borrowed. Real stability is internal. It is the unshakable knowing of your own value, your own direction, your own capacity to navigate uncertainty. Borrowed stability is the security that comes from the external structure itself. When you borrow your stability from your job, your relationship, your financial status, or your social belonging, the stability is real only as long as those structures are intact. When they go, the borrowed stability goes with them, and what remains is the uninsulated truth of your actual inner foundation. If the collapse left you feeling that you have no ground beneath you at all, that everything you understood about yourself has dissolved, that there is nothing solid left to stand on. This is an extremely important revelation, not a catastrophic one, an important one, because it tells you that the ground you were standing on was borrowed, and borrowed ground, no matter how long you have been standing on it, was never yours. The collapse that revealed this is not the problem. It is the invitation to find, for the first time, what your actual ground is made of. Collapse also reveals the depth and nature of your attachments. Not the fact of your attachments, but their quality and their origin. There is a kind of attachment that grows from genuine love and genuine investment, and there is a kind of attachment that grows from fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being without a particular kind of identity, fear of the unknown, fear of what other people will think, fear of having to begin again. These two kinds of attachment feel similar from the inside because both of them produce the experience of not wanting to lose, but they are structurally different. And the collapse makes that difference visible. When the structure that falls was held in place more by fear than by genuine alignment, the collapse tends to reveal a very specific emotional signature. Beneath the grief, beneath the shock, beneath the legitimate pain of loss, there is sometimes a note of something else. A very faint and almost shameful recognition that part of you knew. Part of you always knew that this structure was not right. That you were holding on to it not because it was genuinely right for you, but because the alternative was more frightening than the misalignment. This recognition, when it arrives honestly, is not guilt. It is clarity. And it is one of the most valuable things a collapse can deliver. Collapse reveals your relationship with uncertainty, because the void that follows collapse is pure uncertainty. There is no script for the void. There is no social role that fits inside it. There is no familiar rhythm to organize the days. There is only the open and unstructured reality of a life that has not yet found its next form. And your response to that uncertainty, observed honestly and without judgment, reveals the specific quality of your inner relationship with the unknown. Some people discover in the void that they can tolerate uncertainty better than they believed they could. The identity crisis softens into something more like genuine curiosity. The panic becomes, over time, a kind of spaciousness, and the absence of a defined structure reveals itself to be not only loss, but also possibility. This is not a personality trait that is simply present or absent. It is a capacity that can be developed. But first, it must be identified as a genuine area of the inner architecture that the collapse is calling attention to. Collapse reveals what you were using the structure to avoid. This is one of its most uncomfortable transmissions. Every structure that we build also functions in some degree as a container for things we do not want to look at directly. The busyness of a demanding career can be a structure that holds the question of genuine purpose at a safe distance. The routine of a relationship can be a structure that holds the question of personal authenticity at bay. The identity of a particular social role can be a structure that keeps the question of who you are underneath all the performance from becoming urgent. When the structure is removed, what it was holding at bay is released. The question of purpose becomes unavoidable when the career is gone. The question of authenticity becomes impossible to suppress when the relationship dynamic is dissolved. The question of genuine identity arrives with full force when every social role that used to answer it is no longer available. This is uncomfortable. It is meant to be. The collapse is not only removing the wrong structure, It is also releasing the questions that the wrong structure was preventing you from sitting with. And those questions, as uncomfortable as they are the exact questions that the right new structure will be built from. Collapse also reveals your relationship with your own worth, specifically where you have located your worth. Because if your worth was located inside your productivity, then the loss of the career feels like the loss of your value as a human being. If your worth was located inside being chosen and desired by a particular person, then the end of that relationship feels like evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. If your worth was located inside your financial achievement, then the disruption of your finances feels like a statement about your fundamental competence and deservingness. These are false locations of worth. They are real, they are common, they are deeply understandable given the messages that most people receive from childhood onward, but they are false. Worth is not produced by performance. It is not contingent on being chosen. It is not measured by financial accomplishment. And the collapse that removes the external confirmation of worth is also, in its most honest interpretation, an invitation to discover whether you can locate your worth somewhere that cannot be taken by circumstance. This discovery, when it happens genuinely, is one of the most transformative outcomes of structural collapse. Collapse reveals your outdated identity. Every person carries a self-concept that was largely formed in response to early experiences and early environments. That self-concept was necessary and functional at the time of its formation. But you have not remained in the environment that formed it. You have grown, encountered new experiences, developed new capacities, and moved through enough time that the person you are now is significantly different from the person who built the original self-concept. Yet the old identity often persists, not because it is still accurate, but because it was never formally updated. The collapse structure often turns out to be an expression of the outdated identity. It was built by the version of you who believed particular things about themselves and about what was possible for them. And those beliefs, formed in an earlier period of your life, shaped a structure that fit the old self, but not the current one. The collapse, from this angle, is not only the removal of a wrong structure. It is the retirement of an outdated identity, and that retirement, though painful, is the precondition for the emergence of a self-concept that actually corresponds to who you have become. There's one more deeply personal revelation that collapse delivers, and it must be spoken carefully. Collapse sometimes reveals an unspoken prayer that you were too afraid to say aloud. The prayer for more. The prayer for a different kind of life. The prayer for genuine meaning rather than performed purpose. The prayer for authentic love rather than managed coexistence. The prayer for work that feels like genuine contribution rather than obligation. These prayers were real. They were active inside you even when you were not consciously aware of them. And the structure that collapsed was incompatible with the answer to those prayers. Reality, in its relentless consistency, could not deliver both the answer to the prayer and the continuation of the structure that prevented it. Something had to yield. And what yielded was the structure, because what you were praying for was true and the structure was false. And where there is a conflict between truth and falsehood in the deepest workings of this law, truth eventually wins. The law of structural removal is real. But like any principle of significant power, it can be misread in directions that cause harm rather than clarity. Not every collapse is transformative. Not every disruption is the universe clearing the way for something better. Not every ruin is the law of structural removal in operation. And one of the most important skills in the practice of collapse literacy is learning to distinguish genuine structural removal from its counterfeits. The first counterfeit is what might be called reckless destruction. This is the collapse that is not initiated by reality, but by an individual acting from unprocessed pain, impulsivity, or the desire to escape discomfort through dramatic action. The person who burns their life down, not because the structure was genuinely wrong, but because staying inside the discomfort of necessary growth felt impossible. The person who ends a relationship, not because the dynamic was fundamentally misaligned, but because the vulnerability required for genuine intimacy felt too threatening. The person who leaves a career, not because the work was structurally incompatible with their identity, but because the difficulty of mastery felt easier to escape than to endure. Reckless destruction produces rubble without signal. The ruins do not contain a clear transmission about structural misalignment, because the structure that was destroyed may not have been wrong, it may only have been difficult. And difficulty is not the same as misalignment. A genuine structure that is right for you will still require significant effort, significant patience, and significant willingness to endure periods of genuine challenge without treating those periods as evidence that the structure itself is wrong. The distinction between genuine structural collapse and reckless destruction is not always immediately clear from the inside of the experience, but there are discernible differences in their texture and in their aftermath. Genuine structural collapse tends to arrive with a sense, even beneath the grief, of something that was inevitable, a recognition that the ending was a truth that reality could no longer defer. Reckless destruction tends to arrive with a different quality, more volatile, more impulsive, more driven by the need to escape the present moment than by a genuine reading of the structure's fundamental misalignment. The second counterfeit is what might be called avoidance collapse. This is the pattern in which collapse is unconsciously invited as a way of escaping responsibility. The person who allows a structure to fall, not because it was genuinely wrong, but because maintaining it required a quality of self-discipline, consistency, or relational investment that they were not willing to provide. The relationship that ended not because of fundamental incompatibility, but because the work of genuine partnership was being avoided. The business that failed not because of structural misalignment with the entrepreneur's real identity, but because the sustained effort required for its success was being evaded. Avoidance collapse is perhaps the most difficult counterfeit to identify honestly, because it often arrives with a spiritual rationalization already attached. The person who avoided the necessary work will often tell themselves a story in which the collapse was inevitable, in which reality was removing something wrong, in which they were being guided away from something misaligned. And while this story may contain elements of truth, its primary function is to protect the individual from the more uncomfortable recognition that the structure fell partly because of what they withheld from it. This does not mean that every structure that falls was destroyed by the person inside it. That would be another false interpretation. But the honest practice of collapse literacy requires the willingness to examine your own role in the structural failure without either dismissing your responsibility entirely or collapsing into self-condemnation. The question is not who is to blame. The question is what is true. What was genuinely misaligned, and what was the role of avoidance, fear, and withheld investment in the collapse? Poor stewardship must also be distinguished from genuine structural misalignment, A financial structure can collapse not because the underlying direction was wrong, but because the practices of financial management were insufficient. A relationship can struggle not because the fundamental compatibility was absent, but because the skills of communication, emotional regulation, and relational repair were underdeveloped. A career can stall not because the work was structurally incompatible with the individual's identity, but because the commitment to development and consistent quality was not being honored. In these cases, the signal from the collapse is not primarily about the wrongness of the structure. It is about the practices that were insufficient to sustain it. And the appropriate response is not the abandonment of the structure in search of a more aligned one, but the honest development of the capacities that the structure requires. This distinction matters enormously, because the person who consistently interprets their own poor stewardship as a signal to move on will find themselves in a recurring pattern of beginning new structures, encountering the same developmental demands, and then leaving again under the story of misalignment. Superstition is another distortion that must be carefully separated from genuine signal reading. The practice of reading collapse as signal can, if not held with discernment, slide into a kind of magical thinking in which every difficulty is interpreted as a cosmic message and every obstacle is read as a divine intervention. This is not collapse literacy. This is the projection of meaning onto randomness and the use of symbolic thinking as a substitute for practical discernment. Not every door that closes was closed by the law of structural removal. Some doors are closed by poor preparation, some by timing, some by the ordinary friction of complex systems, some by genuinely random circumstance. The practice of reading collapse as signal requires the simultaneous holding of two capacities: the ability to read genuine structural communication and the ability to distinguish it from the ordinary noise of a complex life that is not always sending metaphysical transmissions. Both capacities are necessary. Neither is sufficient without the other. Finally, the romanticization of destruction must be addressed. There is a pattern that appears in some metaphysical and spiritual communities in which collapse and destruction are glamorized as inherently spiritual, inherently transformative, inherently superior to stability and continuity. This romanticization is its own distortion. Not all destruction is transformative. Stability is not inherently false. Continuity is not inherently misaligned. The law of structural removal is not a celebration of chaos. It is a description of a specific mechanism that operates in specific conditions of genuine structural incompatibility. A structure that is genuinely aligned with who you are, built on a foundation that is honest, sustained by practices that are real, and oriented toward a future that is genuinely your own, is not a structure that needs to be collapsed. It is a structure that deserves to be inhabited fully, invested in completely, and allowed to grow into greater expressions of its fundamental alignment. The goal of collapse literacy is not to make you suspicious of stability. It is to make you capable of distinguishing genuine stability from the performance of stability. And that distinction, once internalized, is what allows you to finally stop fearing collapse while also stopping the unconscious invitation of it. This is the part of the codex where the teaching becomes a method, where the understanding becomes a practice, where the mechanism becomes a protocol that you can actually use inside the experience of structural collapse rather than only understanding it from a distance. The protocol is called the Ruin Code, and it has 6 movements. Each movement must be honored in sequence, Not because the sequence is arbitrary, but because each movement creates the conditions necessary for the next one to be genuine rather than performed. The first movement of the ruin code is grief. This is where the protocol must begin. Not with analysis, not with strategy, not with a search for meaning or a reach toward optimism, with grief. Genuine, unperformed, unhurried grief for what was lost. The relationship that ended was real, even if it was wrong for you. The career that collapsed was years of your life and your effort and your identity. The financial structure that fell was something you built with your hands and your time. The belief system that cracked organized your understanding of reality for years, possibly decades. These losses are real, and they must be grieved as real before anything else can be done honestly. The grief that is bypassed does not disappear, it relocates. It moves from the surface of conscious experience into the body, into the nervous system, into the subconscious architecture of belief, and it continues to operate there invisibly. The person who bypasses grief will find that it emerges later in the form of unconscious reenactment, in the form of self-sabotage, in the form of an inability to be fully present inside the new structure when it eventually arrives. Because the grief that was never completed is still attached to the old structure, pulling attention and energy backward even when the forward direction has been chosen. Grief has a specific quality in the context of genuine structural collapse. It is not the same as despair. Despair says this should not have happened and the future is therefore foreclosed. Grief says this was real and now it is gone, and I am acknowledging that reality honestly. Despair closes. Grief opens. And the opening that genuine grief creates is precisely the opening through which the new signal can eventually be heard. This is why grief is not an obstacle to recovery. It is the gateway through which genuine recovery becomes possible. Allow the grief to be complete in each of its dimensions. Grieve the external loss, what is materially gone. Grieve the identity loss, who you were inside that structure. Grieve the future loss, the version of the future you were moving toward that is no longer available in its previous form. And grieve the certainty loss, the knowing of what each day would look like and who you were inside it. Each of these is a real loss. Each deserves honest acknowledgement. And the acknowledgement of each is what allows the energy invested in them to eventually be released. The second movement of the ruin code is stopping. Specifically, stopping the immediate impulse to rebuild. After collapse, the most powerful instinct that arises is reconstruction. Get something in place, establish some form of structure, restore some resemblance of normalcy. This instinct is deeply human and entirely understandable. But in the immediate aftermath of a genuine structural collapse, this instinct will almost always lead you toward the reconstruction of something that resembles the structure that fell, built from the same misaligned materials, organized around the same false assumptions, and destined to produce the same eventual collapse. The stopping is not permanent. It is not an invitation to remain in the rubble indefinitely. It is a specific and bounded period of conscious restraint in which you resist the urgency to fill the void prematurely. The duration of this stopping will vary depending on the nature and depth of the collapse, but the marker for when stopping has served its purpose is not the simple passage of time. It is the completion of the first movement, grief, and the beginning of the third movement, which is honest inventory. During the stopping, your primary practice is presence, being in the void without filling it, allowing the absence of structure to be experienced rather than escaped. This requires a specific kind of courage that is different from the courage of action. It is the courage of stillness, the willingness to remain in uncertainty without forcing resolution. And while this stillness feels like passivity from the outside, from the inside, it is one of the most active practices available to human consciousness. You are holding open the space in which genuine signal can emerge. The third movement of the Ruin Code is honest inventory. This is where you sit in the rubble and examine what fell with the specific intention of understanding what it was built from. Not to assign blame, not to perform an autopsy, but to read the structural composition of what collapsed so that you can identify what belonged to genuine alignment and what belonged to false architecture. This inventory has specific questions that must be answered honestly. The first question of the inventory is, what was this structure actually built on? Not what you told yourself it was built on, what it was actually built on. Was the career built on genuine vocation or on the need for external validation? Was the relationship built on genuine compatibility or on the fear of being alone? Was the financial structure built on genuine strategy or on the avoidance of a deeper reckoning with what you truly wanted to do with your time and energy? Was the belief system built on genuine encounter with truth or on the inheritance of a framework that felt safer than genuine inquiry? The second question of the inventory is, what was this structure preventing? What version of yourself could not exist inside it? What desires, what directions, what genuine impulses were incompatible with the maintenance of the structure? These are not hypothetical questions. They are diagnostic ones. And the answers to them will reveal, with surprising clarity, what the new structure needs to be oriented toward. The third question of the inventory is, what remained? After everything that the collapse removed, what is still present? What qualities, what values, what capacities, what genuine desires survived the structural removal? These survivals are not residue. They are the raw material of the new blueprint. What remained is what was never built on a lie. And what was never built on a lie is the only material that the new structure can honestly be built from. The fourth movement of the Ruin Code is observation. After the inventory, before any action toward reconstruction, there is a period of watching the cleared ground for the first signs of what wants to emerge naturally. This is different from waiting passively. Observation is an active, attentive, discerning engagement with what begins to appear in the void. Because as the wrong structure is cleared and the grief is honored and the inventory is completed, reality does begin to communicate in a different register. The signal shifts from the cracking language of structural failure to the quieter language of genuine emergence. The signs of genuine emergence are subtle. They are not loud. They do not arrive with the urgency of the panic that followed collapse. They arrive with a specific quality of rightness that is different in texture from the motivated excitement that accompanies the construction of a compensatory structure. Genuine emergence feels more like recognition than invention. Less like building something new and more like seeing something that was always there become visible for the first time, now that the old structure is no longer blocking the view. During the observation period, pay attention to what draws your genuine interest without needing to justify that interest to anyone. Pay attention to what recurs across different contexts, what themes appear in unexpected places, what conversations light something in you that has been dormant for a long time. Pay attention to what feels true even when it is inconvenient, even when it would be easier to ignore it, even when the social world around you does not yet have a category for it. These recurrences and recognitions are the first tracings of the new blueprint. The fifth movement of the Ruin Code is discernment. Once the first signs of genuine emergence have been observed, the next movement is learning to distinguish the authentic signal from the compensatory response. Because not everything that appears in the void is a genuine new blueprint. Some of what appears is fear wearing the costume of direction. Some of what appears is the old structure attempting to reconstitute itself in a slightly different form. Some of what appears is the social pressure to become legible again, arriving as a seemingly clear sense of what to do next. The distinguishing mark of a genuine new blueprint is its relationship to the inventory. A genuine new direction addresses what the old structure was built on and either transcends it or operates from a fundamentally different foundation. It responds to what the old structure was preventing and creates space for what was suppressed. It is oriented toward what remained after the collapse rather than what was lost. A compensatory structure, by contrast, resembles the old structure too closely. It offers the same kind of identity, the same kind of security, the same kind of social legibility. It is the rubble being rearranged into a recognizable shape rather than new material being discovered in the cleared ground. The sixth movement of the Ruin Code is calibrated reconstruction. This is where building begins again. But the building that happens after the 5 preceding movements have been honored is categorically different from the building that happens in panic or in the bypassing of grief. This building is informed. It knows what the old structure was built on and chooses different foundations. It knows what the old structure was preventing and orients itself toward that suppressed direction. It is patient in its pace because it has been trained by the void to distinguish genuine signal from compensatory urgency. Calibrated reconstruction does not demand that the new structure be perfect before its first stone is laid. It demands only that the first stone be genuine, that the first decision made in the new direction be made from actual alignment rather than from the need to escape the void. Because when the first stone is genuine, the entire structure that rises from it carries the frequency of that genuineness. And a structure that is built stone by stone from genuine alignment, however slowly, is capable of holding what no false structure could ever sustain. The Ruin Code is not a quick protocol. It cannot be completed in a weekend of intense journaling or a single week of spiritual retreat. It is a living practice that moves at the speed of genuine transformation, which is almost always slower than the urgency of the circumstances demands. But it is also the only protocol that produces a new structure capable of surviving the next pressure of growth rather than collapsing again the moment the real trajectory pushes against it. As you move through these 6 movements, remember that the sequence is not perfectly linear. Grief will recur during the inventory. Observation will reveal new dimensions that require additional inventory. Discernment will sometimes need to return to the stopping. This is not failure of the protocol. This is the protocol working at the depth that genuine structural transformation requires. The spiraling nature of the process is part of its honesty. Be patient with the spiraling. It is not regression, it is depth. Return to these 6 movements whenever collapse arrives in any domain. Grief, stopping, honest inventory, observation, discernment, and calibrated reconstruction. This is the ruin code. And once it is genuinely internalized, not merely intellectually understood but practiced through actual experience, you will have developed one of the rarest capacities available to a human being: the ability to read the language of structural removal and respond to it with the intelligence that the transmission deserves. The most common mistake made in the aftermath of structural collapse is the immediate search for a replacement. The relationship ends, and within weeks there is a new relationship. The career collapses, and within days there is a new job application that is functionally identical to the one that was lost. The financial structure fails, and within the first shock, the scramble is already underway to rebuild an arrangement that looks and feels as close to the previous one as possible. This impulse is understandable. It is the survival response. It is the nervous system attempting to restore familiarity as quickly as possible, because familiarity is one of its proxies for safety. But the replacement is almost never a genuinely new structure. It is a replica, and a replica of a structure that was already proven insufficient will produce, in time, the same insufficiency in its new form. The relationship entered from the panic of loneliness rather than from the clarity of genuine alignment will recreate the same dynamic as the relationship that ended, because the same unexamined assumptions are carrying the same misaligned frequency into the new container. The career entered from the urgency of income rather than from the honesty of genuine direction will produce the same exhaustion and the same eventual signal of structural misalignment as the career that collapsed. The mistake of immediate replacement is particularly dangerous because it feels responsible. It feels like recovery. From the outside, it looks like someone who is handling things well, who is moving forward, who is not letting themselves be stopped by what happened. But on the inside of the new structure, the work that needed to happen in the void was skipped. The grief was bypassed. The inventory was never completed. The observation period was closed before any genuine signal could emerge. And the result is a new structure that is fundamentally organized around the old patterns, because the old patterns were never examined closely enough to be transformed. The second mistake is the romanticization of collapse itself. There is a specific pattern that emerges in spiritually oriented individuals who have encountered the concept of collapse as transformation. They begin to assign a kind of nobility to the experience of falling apart. They interpret every difficulty as a cosmic intervention. They begin to treat destruction as inherently more spiritual than stability. And in the most acute form of this romanticization, they begin to unconsciously invite collapse rather than develop the discernment to recognize genuine structural misalignment before it reaches the crisis threshold. Collapse is not romantic. Collapse is painful. Collapse is disorienting. Collapse has material consequences that are real and sometimes severe. The fact that collapse can be read correctly and can become the occasion for genuine transformation does not make it something to be celebrated for its own sake. The goal of the practice contained in this codex is not to welcome destruction. It is to develop the literacy to read genuine structural signals early enough that collapse, when it is genuinely inevitable, can be navigated with wisdom rather than panic. And in some cases, early enough that the most catastrophic forms of collapse can be prevented entirely through voluntary structural adjustment. The third mistake is blaming the universe. This is the error of locating the source of the collapse entirely outside yourself and treating it as an arbitrary or hostile act directed at you personally. The universe is punishing me. The cosmos has turned against this path. I am being blocked by forces beyond my control. This interpretation is seductive because it contains a partial truth. Something outside your immediate control did change. The structure did not collapse through your conscious decision. There is a real sense in which the force that removed the structure was larger than your personal agency in the moment. But blame directed at the universe, at reality, at the divine, at whatever name you use for the larger field of intelligence that this codex speaks of, produces a specific and debilitating consequence. It positions you as a victim of the mechanism rather than a student of it. And a victim cannot read the signal. A victim can only experience the impact. The posture of being acted upon rather than communicated with closes the perceptual capacity that collapse literacy requires. It replaces the question, "What is this telling me?" with the statement, "This should not have happened to me." And in the gap between those two responses is the entire difference between transformation and repetition. The fourth mistake is clinging to rubble. This is the error of remaining inside the ruins of the collapsed structure and continuing to treat its fragments as if they retain the full integrity of the original form. The relationship is over, but the behavior patterns of the relationship persist. The career is gone, but the professional identity of the career is still being performed. The financial structure has failed, but the consumption patterns and the self-concept organized around the financial level are still being maintained at significant cost. The belief system has cracked, but its framework is still being applied to new experiences as if it remained intact. Clinging to rubble is not loyalty. It is avoidance. It is the inability to acknowledge that the structure is genuinely gone and that the fragments that remain cannot be reassembled into the original form. The person who clings to rubble prevents the cleared ground from actually being cleared. They keep the old materials present in a form that is neither the original structure nor the new one. They occupy the space where the new blueprint needs to be drawn, with the remnants of a design that has already been identified as insufficient. The fifth mistake is making permanent decisions from panic. In the acute phase of structural collapse, when the grief is most intense and the void is most disorienting and the urgency to restore some form of familiar structure is most pressing, the decisions that are made carry enormous long-term weight. Because decisions made from panic are not made from alignment. They are made from the nervous system's emergency response protocol. They are made from survival rather than from wisdom. The person who makes major financial decisions in the first weeks of financial collapse will often find that those decisions created additional structural problems. The person who makes major relational decisions in the immediate aftermath of a significant ending will often create arrangements that are organized around avoiding the pain of the loss rather than toward genuine new alignment. The person who makes major professional decisions in the shock of job loss will often accept the first available arrangement rather than the most genuinely aligned one. The guidance of the Ruin Code on this point is precise. Delay significant permanent decisions for as long as is materially possible, not indefinitely, not as a strategy for avoiding responsibility, but long enough for the first acute phase of panic to be replaced by a degree of genuine stillness from which the decision can be made with something approaching real discernment. This delay is not weakness. It is the discipline of not multiplying structural problems in the aftermath of the first collapse. Another mistake is treating the collapse as a failure of spiritual practice. Many people who work with the law of assumption, with manifestation, with intentional alignment, will interpret a major collapse as evidence that their practice did not work, that they failed to hold the correct frequency, that their assumptions were not sustained with enough consistency, that somehow they manifested the wrong thing through misalignment of their inner state. This interpretation, while it contains a fragment of structural insight, is almost always punitive in its application. It turns the lens of collapse inward in a way that produces self-condemnation rather than genuine inquiry. The question it needs to become is not what did I do wrong in my practice, but rather what deeper truth was the practice trying to avoid. Because sometimes, the truest and most aligned manifestation that a person's inner state can produce is the collapse of the structure that was preventing the genuine life from becoming possible. The mistake of isolation in the rubble deserves specific mention. Collapse can produce a powerful impulse to withdraw entirely, not only from the noise of social life, but from all genuine human connection. This withdrawal, when it is the honest need for quiet and for space, is appropriate and necessary. But when it extends into complete isolation and the refusal of any genuine human support, it becomes another form of avoidance. The truth of your collapse needs to be held somewhere, not performed to an audience, not turned into a public narrative prematurely, but witnessed by at least one other consciousness that can hold space for the reality of what you are experiencing without rushing you toward resolution. Finally, the mistake of skipping the void by staying perpetually busy must be addressed. Busyness after collapse is one of the most socially acceptable forms of avoidance available. Fill every hour, maintain every obligation, keep moving. Do not allow the silence of the void to become audible. And this busyness, maintained with enough discipline, can effectively prevent the genuine experience of the void entirely. But the void that is never experienced is the void that was never cleared. And the ground that was never cleared is the ground on which the replica of the old structure will inevitably be built. The principles of the ruin code are not limited to the dramatic collapses that announce themselves with obvious force. As you develop collapse literacy, you will begin to recognize the same mechanism operating in subtler territories of your experience. And the application of the protocol to these subtler territories is where the deepest transformation becomes possible, not only in moments of crisis, but in the ongoing practice of living in genuine alignment with who you are actually becoming. In the territory of spiritual awakening, the ruin code operates through the collapse of previous meaning frameworks in a way that is often described as a dark night of the soul. This is the collapse of the interpretive structure through which you previously understood your place in the larger order of things. The specific teachings, the specific practices, the specific communities, the specific language through which your spiritual life was organized can all become structures that, at a certain point in genuine development, the law of structural removal begins to address. This does not mean that spiritual traditions are wrong or that practice is misguided. It means that any structure, including a spiritual one, can become a container that is no longer large enough for what you are becoming. The advanced application of the ruin code in spiritual territory means learning to grieve the old framework without abandoning the genuine inquiry. Learning to sit in the spiritual void, the place where the old language no longer fits, and the new language has not yet arrived, with the same stillness and the same discernment that the physical collapse required. In the territory of career reinvention, the ruin code applies not only to the dramatic collapse of employment, but to the subtler and often more prolonged process of recognizing that a career, while still intact externally, has reached its structural limit in terms of what it can deliver to a person who is genuinely evolving. The advanced practitioner of collapse literacy begins to feel the early signals of this limit long before the external structure fails. They begin the honest inventory before the walls come down. They begin the observation period while the old structure is still nominally functioning. And they allow the new blueprint to emerge gradually rather than waiting for the crisis to make the transition unavoidable. In relationships, the advanced application of the ruin code involves learning to distinguish between the natural difficulties of genuine partnership and the structural signals of fundamental incompatibility. Not every conflict is a signal of wrong structure. Not every difficult season is an invitation to collapse. The advanced practice requires a mature and disciplined discernment, the ability to ask honestly whether the difficulty is the friction of growth inside a genuinely aligned container or the increasingly insistent communication of a structural mismatch that has been present from the beginning, but that was not visible until the investment deepened. Health crises represent one of the most demanding territories for the application of the ruin code. When the body itself becomes the site of structural disruption through illness, injury, or the forced cessation of a lifestyle that was previously taken for granted, the collapse is visceral in a way that no other form of structural removal can fully replicate. The ruin code in health territory must always operate alongside appropriate medical care and practical responsibility, but it also offers a specific perspective that purely medical frameworks may not provide. The question of what the body's disruption is attempting to communicate about the overall structure of the life being lived inside it. This is not the suggestion that illness is punishment or that health crises are always messages to be decoded rather than conditions to be treated. It is the more careful observation that the body is a participant in the overall structural system of a human life, and that its signals, including its disruptions, sometimes carry information that is relevant to the larger inquiry of what structure genuinely belongs in the next chapter. Approached with discernment and alongside appropriate care, this inquiry can be one of the most significant openings that a health crisis makes available. In the territory of money and financial identity, the advanced application of the ruin code moves beyond the crisis management of financial collapse and into the ongoing practice of building financial structure from genuine alignment rather than from inherited beliefs about what money means, what it requires, and what it says about your worth. Every person carries a financial identity, a deep and often unconscious set of beliefs about money that governs their relationship with earning, spending, saving, and receiving. The ruin code applied to this territory begins with the honest inventory of those beliefs. What was your financial architecture actually built on? What was it preventing? What survived the collapses you have experienced in this domain? The return from collapse at the most advanced level of integration produces what might be called a collapse-literate life. Not a life organized around the expectation of further collapse, not a life in which every stability is held with suspicion, but a life in which the signals of structural misalignment are read early, responded to honestly, and in which the ruin code is applied with enough fluency that many of the most catastrophic forms of external collapse are replaced by voluntary internal restructuring. The collapse-literate person does not need the walls to fall to read the signals in the cracks. They have learned to respond to the first whisper rather than waiting for the demolition. This is the deepest promise of the ruin code, not the guarantee of a life without collapse. No honest protocol can make that promise, but the development of a relationship with structural change that is intelligent, honest, discerning, and genuinely generative. The ability to move through the mechanism of removal with the literacy that transforms even the most painful structural disruption into the most precise available guidance toward the life that was always trying to become possible through you. Return now to the house that began this codex. The owner is kneeling in the ruins at sunrise. Everything he arranged, everything he spent years building around the life he thought he was supposed to be living, is gone. The walls have yielded. The floor has opened. The dust has settled over the fragments of a structure that held him through years of ordinary effort and ordinary certainty. And in the silence that follows the collapse, he does not yet know that beneath the broken floor, the rot has finally been exposed to air, and that what seemed like destruction from above was renovation from below. He does not know yet that the ceiling that fell in was not the ceiling of his life. It was only the ceiling of one chapter. He does not know that the furniture he ran to save was arranged in rooms that were always too small for who he was becoming. He does not know that the foundation beneath the rot, the real foundation, the one that was never built on anyone else's design for his life, is still there, still solid, still waiting, not for him to rebuild what fell, but for him to finally build from what remained. And what remained, as the light of the first morning after the collapse moves across the rubble, is this: the knowledge of what he actually loves, what genuinely moves him, what direction his energy has always wanted to move in when it was not being redirected into the maintenance of a structure he had outgrown. What questions he stopped asking because the structure did not have space for the answers. What prayers he had stopped allowing himself to fully form because the structure he was in could not hold their fulfillment. These things did not collapse with the house. These things were inside him before the first stone of the wrong structure was laid. They will be inside him after every wrong structure he ever inhabits is removed. They are what the law of structural removal cannot take, because they are not structure, they are signal. They are the genuine transmission of who he is beneath every architecture he was ever handed or built or borrowed or believed was necessary. And now, in the cleared ground of the ruined foundation, something is visible that was not visible before. A single stone, not placed by him, not sourced from the old materials, not a fragment of what fell, rearranged to look like something new. A stone that belongs to the correct foundation. The first stone of the structure that was always waiting for the wrong structure to be cleared before it could be laid. He recognizes it not because it is familiar in the way the old structure was familiar. He recognizes it because it is true in a way the old structure never fully was. He does not build immediately. He sits with the stone. He holds the grief of everything that fell alongside the quiet recognition of what this single stone represents. He allows both to be real at the same time. And in that dual holding, he discovers something that the old structure never allowed him to experience: the ability to be in genuine presence with the truth of his own life without the insulation of a structure he built to avoid it. If this codex found you at the right time, keep it close. Return to it when the signals begin again. Return to it when the exhaustion arrives that rest cannot repair, when the repetitions become insistent, when the low hum of wrongness becomes too honest to ignore. Return to it when the walls begin to show the first cracks. The ruin code will be here. The archive does not close, and the map it contains is as accurate in the middle of the ruins as it is in the stillness of the cleared ground. This is what the third library holds for those who come to it honestly. Not the promise of a life without collapse, but the language through which collapse becomes legible, the protocol through which ruins become cleared ground, and the recognition that the stone appearing at the center of the ruined foundation is not the end of the story. It is the first sentence of the one that was always true.